What if I told you that the American auto industry, the same one that built the middle class, powered generations of workers, and symbolized freedom itself, is now standing on the edge of collapse? This isn't a conspiracy theory or a rumor whispered online. It's a story unfolding right now inside the boardrooms of Ford, Ram, and every major automaker in Detroit. The numbers are real, the warnings are real, and the storm that's coming could change the way Americans buy cars forever. In the past few months, something extraordinary has happened behind the shiny glass walls of your local dealership. Trucks that were once impossible to find now sit unsold for months. Sticker prices that used to make sense have exploded beyond reason, and the loyal customers who kept the industry alive for decades, they're walking away in silence, refusing to play a game that suddenly feels rigged against them. Stellantis, the company behind Ram, Jeep, and Dodge, has just reported a jaw-dropping $2.7 billion 0 cents loss in a single quarter. Ford, once the symbol of American strength, has quietly set aside $4 billion 0 cents to cover warranty and recall costs that are eating into every ounce of profit. And while corporate executives talk about transformation and market adjustment, the truth is far more brutal. The old business model that made Detroit rich is breaking apart. For years, the system was simple. Automakers built big, expensive trucks. Customers took out longer and longer loans to buy them. Dealers made money. Shareholders cheered. But today, that cycle is dead. Trade-in values have collapsed by as much as $8,000 in a matter of months. New truck prices have soared, $15,000 or more since 2022. And the people who once lined up to trade in and trade up, the backbone of the industry, have disappeared. Behind the scenes, panic is spreading. Dealers are sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars in unsold inventory, paying nearly 9% interest just to keep those trucks on the lot. Floor plan costs that used to be a footnote have turned into financial quicksand. Meanwhile, delinquencies on auto loans have surged to the highest level since the Great Recession, and repossession trucks are once again prowling quiet suburban streets at night. The public isn't supposed to see this side of the story. The desperate conference calls, the internal memos, the whispered fear that Ford and Ram might be running out of time to reinvent themselves. But tonight you will, because what's happening right now isn't just another temporary slump. It's a reckoning, one that could erase decades of profit, wipe out thousands of dealerships, and permanently rewrite what it means to be an American car buyer. The question isn't whether Ford or Ram can survive this year. The question is what happens when the customers they built their empires on stop believing in the dream they were sold. Stay with me, because the numbers you're about to see will change the way you think about cars forever. Detroit is trembling. For the first time in decades, the giants of the American auto industry, Ford, Ram, and their parent companies, are no longer talking about growth, innovation, or record profits. Behind closed doors, they're talking about survival. It began with a report that few outside the financial world noticed. Stellantis, the multinational parent of Ram, Jeep, and Dodge, quietly posted a staggering $2.7 billion 0 cents loss in just one quarter. Analysts initially blamed supply chain hangovers and sluggish European sales, but insiders whispered a darker truth. The U.S. truck market, the beating heart of American manufacturing, was cracking from within. Within days, the mood in Detroit turned from concern to panic. Ford's leadership, facing a growing crisis of its own, held what insiders described as an emergency session at its Dearborn headquarters. On the table were projections showing something executives had once considered impossible: a sharp, sustained drop in demand for full-size trucks, the company's most profitable segment. A leaked slide from that meeting, circulated anonymously among auto journalists, bore a single chilling line in red text: "The consumer floor has collapsed." For years, Ford's F-Series and Ram's 1500 trucks were the industry's golden geese, generating margins of up to 15% more than luxury brands like BMW or Mercedes could dream of. But in 2024, that formula began to break. The average transaction price for a new truck soared past $68,000 0 cents, while the average buyer's income barely moved. The once reliable pipeline of middle-class Americans upgrading every few years began to dry up. Dealerships reported a wave of walkaways. Customers who came in with trade-ins, sat down for financing, ran the numbers, and quietly left. Ford executives tracked this behavior through internal analytics, noting that 1 in 3 potential buyers now abandoned their purchase mid-application. At Stellantis, the situation was even worse. Ram's U.S. sales plunged 27% year-over-year, leaving dealers drowning in unsold inventory. One Ohio dealer, interviewed under condition of anonymity, revealed he was paying $112,000 0 cents a month in interest just to keep 240 trucks sitting on his lot. "It used to be you couldn't keep a Ram 1500 on the ground," he said. "Now I've got 4 rows of them collecting dust." Industry-wide, inventory levels hit a 10-year high of 114 days supply, nearly double what's considered sustainable. The pressure spread quickly through the financial system. Banks and credit unions, nervous about ballooning auto loan defaults, began tightening lending standards. The result was a feedback loop. Fewer approved loans, fewer buyers, more unsold cars. Ford's finance arm reported a 19% rise in delinquencies, its highest since 2009. Repossession companies began hiring again, their lots filling with late-model trucks bought during the pandemic's frenzy of cheap credit and easy approvals. What frightened insiders most, however, wasn't the short-term pain. It was the sense that the old rules no longer applied. For decades, Detroit's automakers had weathered recessions, oil crises, and recalls. Each time they bounced back by tweaking incentives, offering 0% financing, or leaning on patriotic marketing. This time, none of it was working. Surveys showed that 58% of potential buyers now viewed new trucks as financially irresponsible purchases. For an industry that once sold aspiration, that statistic landed like a death sentence. Adding to the turmoil, a series of quiet but telling moves revealed just how desperate things had become. Ford postponed 2 major plant upgrades in Kentucky and Missouri, citing market volatility. Stellantis canceled its dealer incentive program for 2025, effectively admitting that volume sales could no longer be sustained. Meanwhile, a confidential memo from a Ford supply chain executive, leaked to Automotive Weekly, warned of inventory liquidation if sales failed to recover by next summer, code words for massive price cuts that could devalue trucks nationwide. Even the marketing tone has shifted. Gone are the bombastic Super Bowl ads celebrating built tough endurance. In their place, a softer, almost pleading message. "We understand times are hard. We're here to help you drive forward." For longtime industry watchers, the change feels like an obituary in slow motion. An admission that the unshakable confidence of America's auto giants has finally cracked. Inside the boardrooms of Ford and Ram, executives no longer ask how to sell more trucks. They ask whether Americans will ever come back to buy them at all. And as the losses mount, one thing is clear. This isn't just a financial warning, it's a cultural one. The American pickup, once a symbol of strength, progress, and pride, has become a mirror reflecting a nation that can no longer afford its own myths. Her story begins the way millions of American car stories do, with loyalty, optimism, and a simple plan. Jennifer Walker, a nurse from Kansas City, had been driving her Ram 1500 since 2019. It wasn't just transportation, it was part of her life. She bought it used, took care of it like family, and dreamed of upgrading when the time was right. Her father had done the same with his Chevy. Her grandfather with his Dodge. Trading up every few years was a family ritual, a symbol of progress. But when she walked into her local Ram dealership in August 2025, she discovered that the world she thought she knew no longer existed. The salesman greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The lot was full, overflowing in fact. Dozens of gleaming trucks, some with temporary plastic still covering the seats, sat under a burning Missouri sun. The first thing she noticed was the price tag. The Ram 1500 Rebel she had been eyeing 18 months earlier had cost around $54,000 0 cents. Now the same truck was listed at $69,400 0 cents. She blinked, thinking it must be a mistake. The salesman shrugged helplessly. "That's the new price. Costs went up, everyone's paying it." When she handed him the keys to her 2019 trade-in, he tapped a few keys on his tablet, nodded, and then frowned. The number that appeared on the screen made her stomach drop. Her truck, once appraised at $32,000, 0 cents, was now worth barely $24,000, 0 cents. $8,000 gone. Just like that. The man explained it as gently as he could. Used values are falling fast. Market correction, ma'am. Nothing personal. But to Jennifer, it was deeply personal. That $8,000 represented a year of loan payments, weekends of overtime, and every oil change she never skipped. When the dealership ran the new financing numbers, the result was absurd. Even with a healthy down payment, her monthly payment would rise to $1,082, 0 cents. She could extend the loan to 8 years and shave a few hundred off, but the idea of paying for a truck until 2033 felt insane. "You can stretch it," the salesman offered, his voice trailing off, "or maybe look at a lower trim." But even the lower trim, stripped of features and still priced over $60,000, 0 cents, were out of reach. Jennifer did the math twice, then again, as if somehow the calculator might show mercy. It didn't. She handed back her keys and walked out. What she didn't know was that her story had already become a statistic. Across the country, tens of thousands of would-be buyers were doing the same thing, showing up, running the numbers, and leaving empty-handed. Industry reports later revealed that showroom traffic for full-size pickups dropped 28% in a single quarter. Trade-in values had collapsed across nearly every model built between 2018 and 2022. Ford, Chevy, and Ram dealerships alike were watching deals die at the signing table. Economists at Cox Automotive and Edmunds warned that the traditional trade-in, trade-up cycle, the foundation of U.S. auto sales for half a century, was breaking down. Families who once upgraded every 4 or 5 years were now keeping their vehicles for an average of 12.6 years. The oldest car fleet in American history. Rising loan rates, inflation, and stagnant wages had turned the dream of a new vehicle into a financial risk. Jennifer's story hit a nerve online. A local news outlet ran a short segment titled "The $15,000 0 cent shock," and within days the clip had over 3 million views. Commenters flooded in with their own experiences, teachers, construction workers, farmers, all describing the same betrayal. "My truck's worth less than my loan," one wrote. "Feels like I've been robbed." Others shared photos of dealer lots packed with trucks under banners that read "Zero down" and "Lifetime warranty," slogans that suddenly felt hollow. Behind every viral comment was a deeper shift. Americans no longer trusted the promise that hard work would buy them something better. In a country where pickup trucks had long been symbols of grit, pride, and success, that realization hit harder than any recall or recession. Jennifer's decision to walk away wasn't rebellion, it was resignation. And for automakers watching from their glass towers in Detroit, it was a signal that their most loyal customers had finally stopped believing. By the time she drove her old Ram back home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the dealership lights were still blazing across the empty lot. She parked in her driveway, shut off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. The truck still ran fine, but something inside her had shifted. The sense of progress, of reward, was gone. And across America, millions of people were feeling exactly the same way. For decades, the rhythm of Detroit had been predictable, almost ritualistic. Every few years, millions of Americans traded in their old trucks for something new, shinier, stronger, more expensive. Automakers relied on that rhythm like a heartbeat. The constant churn of loans, trade-ins, and leases kept factories humming, dealerships thriving, and shareholders satisfied. But by late 2024, that rhythm had faltered, replaced by an uneasy silence that no marketing campaign could fill. The old business model, built on loyalty and ever-rising prices, was crumbling under its own weight. In the boardrooms of Ford and Stellantis, executives began confronting the numbers they could no longer spin. The data was merciless. Truck buyers were aging, younger consumers were absent, and profit margins, once the envy of the global market, were shrinking. For years, Detroit's formula had been simple: focus on high-midget trucks and SUVs. Cut small cars, load every model with luxury trims and technology, sell aspiration, not utility. But the formula depended on one assumption: that Americans would always stretch their finances to keep buying. Now, that assumption had collapsed. Ford's internal research, leaked to Automotive Business Weekly, painted a grim picture. Over 40% of prospective truck buyers under 35 said they had no intention of purchasing a new vehicle within the next 5 years. They weren't turning to competitors, they were turning away from ownership itself, opting for ride shares, subscriptions, or simply keeping their aging vehicles. Stellantis' analysts described the same phenomenon with brutal simplicity. The middle-class buyer is gone. For companies whose profits came almost entirely from that demographic, it was an existential threat. The seeds of this crisis had been planted years earlier. When the global supply chain collapsed in 2020, manufacturers slashed production and pushed prices sky high. For a brief moment, scarcity made profits soar. Used trucks sold for more than new ones, and automakers mistook that artificial boom for real demand. By 2022, they doubled down, cutting cheaper models, betting on luxury trims, and assuming buyers would keep paying whatever it took. But when the chip shortage eased, production surged back, flooding the market with vehicles priced for a fantasy economy that no longer existed. The bubble popped, and dealers were left choking on their own inventory. In mid-2024, Cox Automotive reported a 113-day supply of unsold vehicles nationwide, nearly twice the healthy level. Dealerships that once celebrated sold-out signs now paid interest on millions in parked assets. In Ohio, a Stellantis dealer owed $117,000, 0 cents, a month just in floor plan interest. In Texas, a Ford lot held $42 million, 0 cents in unsold trucks, with carrying costs approaching $500,000 per quarter. The old playbook. Slash prices, offer incentives, push volume, didn't work this time. High interest rates and consumer fatigue killed the appetite for new loans. Dealers began quietly revolting. Several large franchise groups met in Chicago to discuss collective pressure on Ford and Stellantis to share the cost of financing unsold vehicles. Leaked minutes from that meeting revealed deep resentment. "They've turned us into warehouses, not partners," one dealer wrote. "We're bleeding to keep their numbers alive." Meanwhile, smaller family-owned dealerships, the backbone of rural America's truck sales, started closing their doors. Industry insiders estimated that 1 in 5 mid-sized dealerships could shutter by 2026 if current trends continued. The collapse was visible not just in numbers, but in places once defined by the hum of the auto trade. In Michigan, the once bustling Ford plant in Flat Rock cut a third of its workforce, citing demand recalibration. In Indiana, Stellantis halted plans for a new Ram EV assembly line after battery component tariffs added $1,500, 0 cents per vehicle in projected costs. Even suppliers, from seat manufacturers to electronics firms, began feeling the pressure, announcing layoffs as orders slowed. The ecosystem that had sustained millions of American jobs for generations was beginning to unravel. At the same time, consumers were shifting in ways Detroit hadn't anticipated. The truck, long a symbol of pride and independence, was becoming a liability in the eyes of younger Americans. Rising gas prices, insurance premiums, and maintenance costs turned the dream of ownership into a burden. Social media, once a playground for truck culture, started mocking the excess. Viral videos compared $80,000 0 cents pickups to rolling mortgages. Hashtags like "Keep the Old Truck" and "Drive Paid Off" trended nationwide, reflecting a growing rebellion against debt-driven consumption. Ford and Stellantis tried to adapt, but every move seemed to backfire. Ford introduced its new Smart Lease program, a flexible ownership plan meant to attract younger buyers. It failed within months as customers realized they were paying premium rates for temporary use. Stellantis launched the Ram Renew campaign, offering trade-in bonuses and free maintenance. But dealers said it barely moved inventory. Consumers weren't just hesitant, they were disillusioned. The emotional disconnect ran deep. For decades, trucks had been marketed as extensions of identity, tools of hard work, masculinity, and pride. Ford's "Built Tough" and Ram's "Guts Glory" had become cultural mantras. But now those slogans ran hollow. In a post-pandemic, inflation-weary America, toughness meant keeping your old vehicle running and your credit score intact. the psychology of buying had changed. Automakers still spoke the language of power and pride, but their customers were speaking the language of survival.